Greetings, my glorious Adeptus Custodes. Today I will tell you the truth. And it is, alas, not the truth that every corner of the Imperium knows, for our dark past is full of bitterness and suffering. Many of you wonder how I know so much about the universe. Why do secrets hidden from even the most loyal servants of the Imperium lie within the pages of this diary? Events so far in the past and so far in the future. Well, I cannot tell the whole truth, not even to you, my loyal Custodes. I can only say that the events on Molech and my work with artifacts from the dark age of technology are to blame. In my research, I have seen the events of many worlds and eras of countless galaxies, but I never knew what it was. The desire of the Materium to warp my mind, or simply childish fantasies and nightmares, and nothing more. Today I want to tell you about one such event. Well, a great many different races inhabit the darkness of space. All of them are completely different, but they have something in common. The desire to survive drives each of the living beings. It makes them monsters, which because of the fear of being destroyed, try to destroy others. And in the midst of this cycle of hatred, the Tau Empire is like a bright sun shining its light into the void of the abyss. Conquering planets and star systems one by one, the young race banishes ignorance and brings hope for change for the better. They are confident in the superiority of their rapidly advancing technology. The Tau believe they are destined to bring enlightenment, peace, and prosperity to this barbaric galaxy. The Tau once looked up into the sky and saw a vast array of incomprehensible lights. Now the borders of their empire are constantly expanding, and they are taking over more and more planets and star systems. Eloquent diplomats negotiate incessantly, urging newly discovered alien races to join the greater good, and their countless armies fight on many fronts, carrying the message of the greater good to one and all. With great strategic thinking, unimaginable technology, and a dedication to their cause, these alien militarists are up to the task. Many other races have similar histories, from stone tools to space conquest, but the Tau Empire stands out. It is a matter of time. Not many generations passed after the first settlements were founded, and they were already building fortresses and using firearms. After a few more generations, they began to populate the first planets. But what is the reason for such a sharp jump in development? Near the eastern edge of the galaxy is a small planet called Tau. It is mostly an arid world, with few areas of lush greenery and shallow oceans. The planet is home to one single huge continent, with lands consisting of game and wildlife-rich savannas and expansive plains interrupted by stretches of rocky deserts. It is hard to imagine, but this rapidly evolving race long before venturing into space began as hunters in these lands. As the Tau tribes grew, they spread across the lands, following game migrations, fleeing natural disasters, or seeking escape from increasing competition. As the centuries passed, each branch of this people spread into different areas, preferring to evolve in their own way, thus displaying a special gift for adapting to their chosen environment. Those whom migration brought to the river valleys began to establish well-designed agricultural communities, mastering ore mining, metalworking, and tool-making to build the first settlements. Others began to live among the impregnable mountain peaks. These Tau, with their thin webbed wings, soared on the warm air currents rising from the hot plains. Everyone was always happy to hire such Tau as scouts and messengers. Some tribes guessed that other Tau communities could produce what they themselves could not. By entering into trade agreements with different communities, these Tau recognized that other people's abilities could be of potential benefit to themselves. But there were also those Tau who preferred to remain on the plains, even in the face of disaster and cataclysmic events. They grew stronger and more experienced, becoming skillful and ferocious warriors and hunters. They took what they wanted, from whom they wanted and when they wanted, and if they had to use force to do so, it was even better for them. After several centuries, accelerated development allowed the Tau to build huge fortresses and use firearms. Thanks to it, and an alliance with the Flying Tau, they defended themselves against fierce raids by the Plains tribes. Because of the warriors, trade routes were cut, and Tau diplomats were hunted to prevent them from making alliances with other communities. This all led to massive intertribal warfare sweeping the mainland. The peoples pounced on each other in fierce battles, using all their primitive weapons. The war dragged on for many decades, with casualties numbering in the hundreds of thousands on both sides. Famine, constant water shortages, and spreading epidemics followed, as is easy to guess. This continued until the Tau, dying of starvation and disease, outnumbered those dying of war and battle, but still the hatred and cruelty that lodged deep in the hearts of each of them did not allow the war to be interrupted even for a moment. Despite the huge losses on all sides, the battles were becoming more and more fierce, and it seemed that the entire Tau race was ready to burn itself in the fire of its own cruelty. Times were hard for the entire Tau civilization. The war did not stop, hunger did not relent, and epidemics were on the rise. And then strange lights appeared in the sky. Many considered these lights to be a sign that they had the last days to live, that the disappearance of the Tau was near, and after that many legends appeared about how the Tau race could be saved from total extinction. The story of the coming of the etheric Phiotown is considered to be the main of these legends. It tells how, over a mountain plateau that the inhabitants called Phiotown, an alliance of warlike plains dwellers and flying Tau, laid siege to the most powerful city of Tau builders, which was also a large and impregnable fortress. The city dwellers' constant attempts to start negotiations with the Tau warriors ended without even starting. Their rage was already simmering in anticipation of a bloody battle, so they were not even going to consider other options, those that did not involve slaughter between the tribes. And for 5 years now, the cannons of Phioton have been relentlessly repelling assault after assault. But food and ammunition were running low. In addition, pestilence began to rage inside the city walls, and after another assault, night fell, and the city dwellers became despondent, not realizing that deliverance was at hand. In complete silence, an unusual-looking Tau emerged from the darkness of the besieging forces' camp and asked to be escorted to the army commander. He spoke softly and calmly, and his words were imbued with such undeniable authority that the sentries did not have the heart to refuse him. At the same time, a Tau of unusual appearance approached the walls of the impregnable city. He stood before the guards and did not say how he had gotten into the city, only that he had asked to meet with the fortress chief. Once again, his request could not be refused. The ruler of the city listened to him. Not an hour later, the gates of the mighty fortress opened, and the stranger led the rulers into the torch-lit camp of the attackers. When the enemies, who less than an hour ago were ready to destroy each other, met the newly arrived guests called themselves ethereal and quietly invited everyone to sit down. In the complete silence of the night, under the light of the moon, they began to speak. The mysterious ethereals explained that the skills of each of the tribes were unique and should be put to good use. They spoke of the greater good, which could only be achieved if all the Tau denied the enmity and hatred in their hearts and began to work together. The two strangers had spoken all night. They had spoken quietly and calmly, but their speech had been so precise and so incredibly persuasive that the other Tau listening to them sat with their mouths wide open, ready to follow them at any moment. When the sun appeared on the horizon, a truce was reached between the seemingly eternal enemies, and it soon became apparent that Phioton was only the beginning of the guidance of the ethereals. Those mysterious beings became more and more numerous, and their tidings of the greater good reached every corner of the planet like another epidemic. A new philosophy was taking hold of the minds of thousands of Tau every day. They finally abandoned internecine warfare and became more prosperous than ever before. Beautifully built cities and towns began to fill the mainland, trade routes flourished, and flying Tau provided high-speed communications everywhere. More ethereals came to the warriors from the plains than all others combined. These Tau, who had lived only by battle since the earliest times, could not accept the new orders of the ethereals for the longest time, and demanded serious proof. But watching the impressive progress of the other Tau tribes of the plains, they could not help but marvel at their achievements, and finally yielded to the entreaties of the ethereals. Immediately thereafter, the ethereals assembled the elders of each tribe, and decided that from that day forward, the Tau would be divided into castes. Each caste will be given the name of the element that best fits its role in the philosophy of the greater good. Builders and craftsmen would become the Earth caste. Merchants and civil administrators would become the Water caste. Flying Tau scouts would become the Air caste, and the mighty warriors of the plains would become the Fire caste. The ethereals, who had saved the Tau from extinction or at least from savagery, were treated with the utmost reverence. So they, as the smallest caste of all, became the guiding force of all the Tau, for only to them was revealed the future that was destined for this people. So under the leadership of the ethereals, the society of the future empire took shape. The Tau entered an era of unprecedented rapid change. This period was marked by tremendous scientific breakthroughs in almost every field. Each caste tirelessly pursued new discoveries for the greater good. As a result, these very new discoveries sprang from the horn of plenty. Leaps and bounds were made in metallurgy, engineering, energy, and weapons production. Almost daily, science moved forward, adversity and disease receded, and the planet Tau began to show signs of overpopulation. But the ethereals already knew the answer to this question as well. Pointing to the stars, they ordered the Earth caste to begin building and testing rockets to populate other worlds. The Air caste, on the other hand, began training future pilots. In this time of great discovery and prosperity, only the Fire caste lacked their characteristic forward motion. Despite the fact that this caste used ever-improving weaponry to hunt down especially large and dangerous predators on Tau, there was little need for a regular army. As a consequence, discontent began to grow within the ranks of this caste, threatening to once again upset the stability among all the tribes. The ethereals, in an effort to assuage the irritation, took to developing a new, highly disciplined way of life. The Code of Fire was taken as a guide, ancient customs of honor passed down through generations from the hunting tribes of the plains. Taking this warrior's path as a basis, the Fire caste introduced a system of warrior training from birth to death, initiating a statutory way of life that is still adhered to today. The ethereal's idea that the Tau's destiny was to rule the stars was very warmly embraced by all castes. Immediately after several rockets successfully traversed the atmosphere of their home planet, the Tau immediately began construction of orbital stations. These were followed by the construction of a base on a nearby satellite. The Tau made sure that their world was part of a dense star cluster, with dozens of planets quite close to each other. Consequently, search ships, probes, and various long-range search instruments were sent out into the depths of space. Exploration showed that life was possible on some of these planets. The construction of a huge orbital dock allowed larger spacecraft to be assembled, and it wasn't long before attempts were made to colonize the planets. A nearby planet called Taun was the first in this series of bold new ventures. After founding the first colony on the planet Taun, the people continued to push the borders of their empire at an explosive pace. But space travel and new and unfamiliar habitats were taking their toll. Casualties among the pioneers were high. As they traveled farther and farther from their homeworld, they began to encounter various alien creatures, many of which turned out to be quite dangerous. Finally, during the landing on the planet, the Fire caste warriors were able to prove that their rigorous training was worth something. The huge reptiles that inhabited the planet had devoured many of the colonists before the Fire caste managed to drive the monstrous creatures away with a quick landing and a practiced salvo. The desert planet was so crawling with ferocious predators that the Fire warriors had to kill them all before the settlers could even land on the planet. The Tau encountered more than just monsters along the way. During this early expansion, alien races were also found. Entire civilizations of alien creatures. The Fire castes were already preparing their arsenal to destroy them as well as the rest of the fierce creatures, but the ethereals saw this as an opportunity to bring them light instead of war. Just as on Tau, the ethereals stopped the tribal wars and forced them to work for a common goal. These outsiders had to be welcomed and allowed to contribute to the greater good. The ethereals ordered the Tau to welcome all outsiders into their society, no matter how strange they looked, no matter if they were mired in barbarism, trapped in wild prejudices, or simply unaware of the greatness of the destiny before them. The Ethereals said that everyone should be welcomed into the new Tau Empire with open arms. From that moment on, whenever the Empire met a new alien culture, the Ethereals used a well-honed tactic in which each race was assigned its own role. Planets that met the requirements were explored, and if an alien civilization was discovered, the water caste representatives, well-trained in the fine art of negotiation, were sent to make contact with them. Every proposal to ally with the Tau Empire was carefully crafted to attract the attention of the outsiders. They were offered protection from enemies, lucrative trade deals, or the wonders of modern technology created by the land caste. The multi-armed Thraxians, Nikasar, and many others responded to such respectful greetings. The more primitive outsiders agreed immediately, succumbing to the speeches of the courteous ambassadors of the water caste. Others took some time, but the result was always the same, and after a few years each race contributed to the development of the greater good. For example, the Agrid race allowed the Earth caste to build many floating factories on their planet, which was covered with oceans. This was their payment for protecting the planet with orbital stations and allowed them to contribute to the greater good. Yet despite the skill of diplomats, negotiations did not always succeed, and not all races were so accommodating. Those of them who flatly rejected any cooperation were given a harsh ultimatum. The full power of the Fire Caste was unleashed on any outsider who did not comply. As soon as the Fire Warriors received the order, they would land on the targeted planet, launch a series of swift and devastating attacks, and then retreat, avoiding retaliation. After a few such attacks, they were given a little more time to think and change their minds. The aliens had no choice, for the Fire Warriors would disable key industrial facilities and all long-range communications. As a result, the alien civilization would find itself cut off from the rest of the world and would not know whether or not other places had accepted the conditions of the Tau. Such divide-and-conquer tactics have brought most enemies back to the negotiating table. Yet history knows of a few instances where a war of extermination could not be avoided. Despite the fact that the population of Tau was growing exponentially, the expansion of the Empire was on such a scale that the warriors of the Fire Caste were no longer sufficient. They often faced superior enemy forces, but the cunning and calculating Tau commanders quickly realized that any army, even the most numerous, could be brought to its knees with well-planned lightning strikes and judicious use of superior firepower. Any race faced with the choice between total annihilation and assimilation, which promised survival, albeit within the growing Tau Empire, would succumb to the inevitable. However, there is one race that has become a notable exception: the Orcs, a widespread race of green-skinned savages in which even the most mundane matters are resolved by force. The Tau first found Orcs around their first colonized planet, Taun, but they soon discovered that diverse tribes of Orcs existed in every star system the Tau surveyed. They quickly learned to pick out a recognizable trace on their detection instruments and began to find them with alarming regularity on planets, moons, asteroid belts, and just about anywhere else where life could exist. Only after many battles did the Tau finally abandon their futile attempts to annex the Orcs in a way that seemed so successful with a dozen other civilizations. It was simply impossible to negotiate with these creatures. Eventually, even the Ethereals themselves realized that these outsiders were hopeless and amended their assimilation procedures accordingly. They signed a decree that any attempt to annex the Orcs should be refrained from, and finally declared that the greater good would be better off without them. Now, when these Dangaroo Savages were discovered, the standard procedure for dealing with Orcs dictated two paths: either exterminate them as quickly as possible, or mark the sector with warning beacons to establish a secure cordon around them. Yet, as good as these methods sounded, the Tau had learned the hard way that there were no absolutely foolproof methods, for Orcs were too unpredictable. From their first steps in space, the Tau had won nothing but victory after victory. Under the guidance of the Ethereals, each caste has met every obstacle it has encountered, and no one has doubted the superiority of the Tau. On the far side, however, the Tau faced an enemy unlike any other, and the epic battles that followed marked the beginning of a whole new era of battle. The sequel follows,